if we'd opened that gate, we risked the airfield getting overrun again. And if the airfield got overrun again, we'd have lost 1-2 days of the evacuation, which was 8,000-9,000 people not evacuated per day from across all of the different nations. So you have to make those very difficult decisions about do you save the many or do you save the few? And in that particular case, I decided that the many had to win.
Diana, it's a real pleasure to meet you. Can we just start by talking about your career? I mean, when did you join? When and why? What motivated you?
It wasn't a calling, shall we say. So I joined in 2002. In fact, I went for my interview the week before 9/11. So took a while to get in, and I actually wanted to join the prison service. I wanted to be a prison governor. I was doing a criminology degree. That was what I aspired to be. And then somebody at a careers fair said, why don't you come and have a look at the Air Force? And I went, and they do these fantastic visits where you can go and spend a couple of days with them. Thought, yeah, I quite fancy this. I signed up for 6 years and I'm still there 21 years later. So.
Wow, and you've been presumably in some very hairy situations over the years, but I would imagine nothing on the scale of what you confronted in the August of 2021.
No, I think August 21 was a whole 6-month deployment with all of the chaos and the highs and the lows that you normally get in 6 months in for me sort of 3.5 weeks, which was quite intense, to put things mildly.
So just let's go back a little bit. What was your role? You were an aviation security specialist.
Yeah.
Which means?
So the RAF Police have a number of roles, and one of them is we essentially do airport security. So we go around the world with our aircraft, protecting them sort of on the ground and in the air, and I am a complete and utter geek in it. So I get excited about the bag scanning machines at Heathrow. And having done that, having spent probably 15 years of my career doing that in different ways all over the world, in some quite cheeky places and some very benign ones, I was actually commanding our sort of ready-to-go squadron, so the squadron that does that travel all over the world, that goes sort of away whenever our aircraft do, when I got a phone call saying, how would you do this, and what do you think we need to do in line with all of the various bits of policy and so on and so forth.
Let's get the timeline right then. When did you get that initial phone call talking about a theoretical trip to an unmentioned location?
Yeah, so it's a hypothetical, very hypothetical conversation. In June, sort of middle of June, we were
of 2021.
Of 2021. So I mean, we were watching the news. We knew something was coming, and if the Air Force was used, we knew we'd be going because that's our job. And actually, I had a new group of staff who had just come from the RAF Police School down in Portsmouth. And we had decided it was probably a good idea to give them a bit more practice of being uncomfortable and living out of a bag, basically. So we'd taken them to a small training area and put them in a wood and told them to crack on. And about a day into it, whilst sort of saying, we've got some deployable kit for setting up an airport, we should probably bring that with us and see if we can, remember how to put it together. And it was while we were doing that I got the phone call saying, well, hypothetically speaking, if you were to go to an unknown location, to pick up an unknown number of people with an unknown threat, unknown period of time, how many people do you want? And of course the answer to that's unknown.
Yeah, but you did know what they were referring to.
We did, and it is, so we have some standing things. So we have a standing commitment to support hurricane relief and natural disasters, but it's not hurricane season in the middle of June. So yeah, we had a pretty good idea, and it was that I planned to.
And by this time, you'd had quite a bit of experience. What is your mindset when you get a phone call like that? Is there excitement, anticipation? What is it?
If I'm being really honest, I didn't expect to go myself. So for what the initial sort of Foreign Office plan was, there was no requirement for me. There was a requirement to send my troops. So it was a bit like, okay, what do I need to do to get the troops ready to go? And start ticking off things like getting jabs, getting kit, etc., etc. How many people, what do we need to do to practice? How are we going to do that? But it very, very quickly became obvious that we probably needed to do a contingency plan for the worst case, and the worst case would need people with a lot of ops experience. I've been to Afghanistan before, I've been to Iraq. I actually left my basic training and went straight to Northern Ireland. So, I've been doing this a long time, and my sort of boss was like, we want to send you, and we want to send you as part of that advance party, so that just in case, you can advise the Foreign Office on how to do it anyway on the civilian side, if that's what we end up doing. But actually, can you go and just make sure we know what we're doing?
One of the most poignant moments in evacuation actually is when you say that you felt at times like you were taking, I think you said, a sixth form field trip to Kabul. And I have to say, it really struck me because some of the lads, they were lads. I'm not being patronising. We are talking about 19-year-olds, aren't we? Yeah,
19, 20-year-olds. I think one of the challenges that this country has, because we don't have conscription or anything, is most of the public, all they know about war is what they see on the TV. And of course, on TV and films, etc., soldiers are old. They're in their 30s, they're in their 40s, they're even in their 50s. I mean, by military standards, I'm ancient. I mean, I really am decrepit. And
how old are you, Di?
I'm 43.
Right.
But I really am. People have short careers. And actually, wars are fought by 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And the average age of my team out there was 23, which is about right, actually. But as the boss, as their commander, as their squadron commander, it's a huge responsibility, because they are 20-year-olds, and they do think they know everything. And they did sit there before we left like this, going, yeah, okay. As I sort of told them they'd need to take a roll mat, and probably, they wouldn't have a bed, and they needed to take some rations with them. And they're like, yeah, all right, boss, yeah, we know. We've been there before.
But they hadn't.
And that's my job, is to ensure that they do take their roll mats and a sleeping bag and everything that they actually need instead of what they think they need.
And what is you say you have a definite duty towards them. It's not maternal exactly or paternal, but it's a dedication to them. What is it?
Yeah, it's a huge commitment to them. Yeah. So it isn't paternal. They're employees at the end of the day. Yeah. But it's something slightly different. So it's a very, very tight bond that is forged through adversity, which means that I saw one of them last week, came down to have a chat because things weren't going great. I was speaking to another one on the phone last night. You have that bond, and you feel responsible for them, and you can't switch that off, because ultimately we put them in those positions, and therefore it's our job to look after them.
So those young men who did sit back and roll their eyes when you were issuing them instructions, what are they like now, broadly speaking?
Well, first of all, they've grown up, men and women. It was a 50-50 split that we took, and they grew up very, very quickly. You do. I did. That first time somebody's trying to kill you is quite grounding, and does make you do that. They're okay generally. Most of them are absolutely fine. Some of them better than others, but the best support there is for them is each other. And they are, as a group, when we showed the documentary to them 2 weeks before it was broadcast, you could see how close they still are. And they sort of, there's almost this sort of unspoken bond between them, and they really do look after each other. And for those that need a bit of extra help, again, the Air Force is set up for that and is really good at dealing with it. So
let's get back then, sorry Diana, to the mission itself. You get to Kabul, and your aim was to do what exactly?
So initially the aim was just to understand the situation on the ground. So we were getting two very different sets of reports, sort of one, the formal sort of intelligence type side of the house, and then the other, what we were seeing on TV. So it's like, okay, we knew a lot of people who worked at the airport. An awful lot of the contractors there were ex-Royal Air Force, some of them ex-RAF Police. So it's about sitting and talking to them and actually understanding and looking at the situation. Again, having worked with the Afghan security forces myself, I kind of understood when we talked to them what they were really saying. And there was a really good indicator that things weren't going quite as was being reported.
Well, that's a very military way of putting it. I mean, basically the Taliban were proceeding at pace to take the country again.
Yeah, they were.
And basically we got it wrong, we'd miscalculated.
Yeah, we had, but it was blindingly obvious on the ground that we had. Although there was a huge amount of denial in Kabul itself. So in Kabul itself, with one hand, the sort of the people we were talking to who worked at the airport, etc., saying, no, the Taliban they've done a deal, they're not going to enter the city. There's going to be an ordered transition over a period of time. It's going to be different. That's not going to happen. But at the same time, as I stood sort of looking out across Kabul city, because it's this sort of dust bowl sort of surrounded by mountains, or you could see all these tiny little fires as all of the government buildings burnt their records. Well, those two things don't add up. And actually, actions speak much louder than words. So if they're burning their records, then they're not staying, they're not standing.
And how many people did you think you were going to have to try to evacuate?
So we were told that they didn't really know, but somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000.
And who are these people, or were these people?
So predominantly British passport holders, and actually the majority that we evacuated were British passport holders. Predominantly British passport holders, but also certain members of the Afghan National Security Forces, and then our interpreters, the ones that we really cared about the most, those that had worked with us for 20 years in sort of Helmand and, in my case, Kandahar.
And how many people in the end were you able to bring out?
Just over 15,000.
So 3 times as many?
Yeah, 5 times 3, and we would have got it right, yeah.
Yeah, wow, okay. That really should concentrate the mind. So you arrive, the scene, you've described it already approaching a certain amount of chaos, denial. Did you tell the people back in Britain that there was, frankly, a diabolical situation on the ground?
Well, there was still calm at this point. So it was actually still very, very calm on the ground. There wasn't any panic at this point. That came later. But there is a formal change. So we had a joint task force headquarters there who were doing their bit, the formal bit. But I was absolutely speaking to my deputies, the sort of the junior officers that were going to come out with the troops, and my headquarters, and saying, what that worst case scenario, that's what I'm going to need, and make sure that they're ready. Make sure, essentially, what I think one of the conversations was literally make sure they bring their ammo in their hand luggage.
So what day did the proverbial really hit the fan?
So it happened overnight. It was very calm, and overnight the British Embassy closed in utmost secrecy, as did the American Embassy. And we sort of did that, great, got those away. And then the next morning, Kabul woke to the news that the president was going to make a speech. But he was actually, he made a speech that said he was going to make a speech the next day.
Okay.
So, okay, right, well, that tells you quite a lot, doesn't it? He never made that speech because he'd already fled. And by that point, the Taliban were at the gate, but still saying they were going to hold, still saying they weren't going to enter the city. Of course, the Taliban isn't an army as our army is. It's lots of little groups and lots of little control groups that you're trying to control, and that didn't work, and they did enter the city. And the moment people realised that the British Embassy and the American Embassy had closed, all the other embassies closed. And at that point, all bets were off. And luckily that coincided with the same day that our troops all arrived and the paras arrived. So fortuitously, those two things happened on the same day.
And anyone with a British passport was told to go to a particular hotel,
Yes.
the Baron Hotel.
Yes.
But of course, far too many people turned up there. The roads were clogged. There were just diabolical scenes all over the place.
Yeah, and in these situations, I mean, we talk about the Brits being leaders of the world type thing and people following what the Brits do. And I sort of half believed it. I saw it in action in Kabul. So first of all, on the air station, on the base itself, there was absolute chaos. There's lots of people, lots of contracts, etc., collapsed in and needed to be flown out. And I turned to sort of an American colonel and a Turkish colonel and sort of said, "Sirs, what are we going to do?" And the American said, "Well, it's not my orders. I'm evacuating Americans, not my problem." And the Turk just said, "I don't know. What are you going to do?" And that was happening on base, and we did take a number of the leadership roles on base, sort of the coordination roles, etc. And at the Baron Hotel, other nations were beginning to arrive and sort of say, "So you've got a plan? Can we piggyback on yours?" So what you ended up with is it wasn't just Brits going through the Baron. We provided the security, and the Paras did an incredible job of keeping that safe to allow an awful lot of nations, in fact, nearly every other nation apart from the Americans, to do their evacuation through the Baron as well.
Just for the purposes of listeners who might be and viewers might be a bit baffled, who are these British passport holders, apart from the people who'd worked for the British Army's interpreters? And I get why you're so passionate about helping them and their families. The others, I mean, there's a reference in Evacuation to people who actually had popped to Kabul for a wedding.
Yeah, we saw that a lot. So I was amazed. There were contractors, so the whole of Afghanistan, really, the infrastructure was run by Western contractors, right, as part of the sort of the NATO mission.
Yeah.
And so, and they had all stayed and were all adamant they were going to stay. But the moment the embassies went and the Taliban took over, they then quite rightly realised it was time to leave. In fact, they were told to go. So we had British passport holders of that description. We also had an awful lot of people, because it was the summer holiday, going to visit family. So I was amazed at the number of family groups who had popped back for a wedding, gone over for 2 weeks in their annual summer 2-week holiday, who had not listened to the embassy advice of do not travel. And I think if there's one thing that I've learned from all of this, it's if the embassy says don't go somewhere, don't go.
Yeah, so I'm actually amazed by how equable and reasonable you are about that. It would have driven me, I think, to distraction if I'd known that people had deliberately put themselves in that position.
Yeah, but they're British passport holders at the end of the day,
So, okay, yeah.
and they needed help, and that's what we're there to do. So there were a few where you sort of said, "Oh, where are you from?" and they sort of said, "Oh, Tower Hamlets," and you're like, "Okay," right. But we're just very lucky to be British and to have a government that will come and pick us up, because not every government did.
So the decision making that you had to do, and that some of these very young people had to do as well. There's a point in Evacuation where somebody says that effectively British foreign policy, with all its complications and nuance, actually drilled down to a teenage soldier making a decision in a split second about whether or not somebody was allowed to get on a plane. And that really, really struck me.
It was incredibly challenging. We had a slightly different situation inside the airport. So initially everybody was coming straight to us because it took the Baron Hotel a bit of time to set up. It doesn't just miraculously happen. So we were dealing with all of those people, and it was pretty full on for sort of 3 or 4 days. Then the numbers cut down to a trickle, really. So you're looking at probably making 20 to 30 of those decisions a day instead of 200 to 300. But it's still really challenging, and I was very conscious that you shouldn't put those decisions onto a 19-year-old. So we put in place a system of evacuation, essentially, where if from a technical perspective you weren't confident to make a decision, or just morally you couldn't, you escalated that. And I had an incredible Sergeant Major from the Royal Logistics Corps with me as well, and between the two of us, we made those decisions instead of the troops.
And I know that there are some of those decisions that you had to make that you still think about.
A lot of them, yeah.
Can you talk about just some of the examples? What about I think there were 4 young women who came to you, weren't there?
So these are the women at the gate. So it was actually quite a big group of women. So the movers, a soldier came and found me and sort of said, "Mum, we need you to come down to the gate." And there was a crash gate just by where we'd sort of set up essentially our own passenger terminal. And it had a load of people outside it, and they were a group of very well-educated women, very well-educated, and fluent English, quite young, and they were all single. And they had letters from the Taliban that basically said, "We know who you are, we know you're single, and we're going to come get you," and sort of stand by, essentially. And they were desperate for help. But first of all, they were on the wrong side of the gate. If they'd been on the other side of the gate, the UK still wouldn't have helped them. They weren't eligible to come to the UK. But we had sort of a lot of agreements. I understood what other nations
could offer,
yeah. and we sort of did do a bit of like, "Oh, well, I can't help you, but this nation may be able to." But they were on the wrong side of the gate. And unfortunately, if we'd opened that gate, we risked the airfield getting overrun again. And if the airfield got overrun again, we'd have lost 1-2 days of the evacuation, which was 8,000-9,000 people not evacuated per day from across all of the different nations. So you have to make those very difficult decisions about do you save the many or do you save the few? And in that particular case, I decided that the many had to win.
How did those women react?
They were distraught, and completely understandably, and were obviously begging me for help, asking me how as a human being I could do that, as a woman how could I do that, and so on and so forth. But the reality, actually, this is really helpful. Your uniform protects you from it being you. It's not me making that decision. It's me as a representative. It's the representative of His Majesty's government making that decision. and that really helps. And it is sort of like a barrier, and it does protect you, but it still hurts.
And there were other women turned away because they couldn't prove that the children they had with them were actually their own.
Yeah, so we mainly at the Baron Hotel, but again, we did have a few of those sort of cases where you would sort of be like, okay, who is this? Yeah, this child probably doesn't belong to you, and then there is a real balancing act, because the UN has a concept of do no harm. And as a police officer, I've taken an oath to protect people's human rights. Well, in that situation, whose human rights is most important? It's human trafficking, which is a criminal offence, and it is also, potentially damaging to that individual. But if I don't let that child travel with that family, then that family's human rights, they're going to go out the gate, and there's a very good chance they're going to be executed on their way out. So you've got that in your mind. If I separate that child from those people, I'm then responsible for that incredibly vulnerable child, and need to find a way of getting them to the UK because they have a British passport and they are entitled to go, for example. So then what do I do? How do I look after that child? Well, I take a searcher and I send that searcher back to the temporary safe location with them. But that then slows down processing, which means that seats go empty on a plane, which means that less people are saved. So every single one of them is just a balancing act of how do I do the least harm, and what is, for that particular situation in front of me right now, with all of the other factors going on around me, what is the right thing to do? And ultimately it comes down to your gut and just making that decision.
Now, anybody who watched a news bulletin during that period of time in the August of 2021 will be familiar with the chaos at the airport, with those images of people standing in the sewer, for example, with babies being handed over to troops and just people utterly desperate. And then there was a terrorist attack.
Yes.
Which just, is covered in Evacuation, and I do urge people to watch all 3 of the programmes. But that must have been just diabolical.
So it was expected. There'd been intelligence for a number of days that something was coming. It's a very porous camp. They were finding a lot of people who had broken onto camp as well. So it was expected, but that doesn't make it any easier. Again, the Paras did just such an incredible job, and how they did that, how the medics did what they did as well, was absolutely incredible. For us, the main focus on that was injured people who were coming through. I had some team medics who are essentially just service police officers that have done a bit more medical training, and a number of them, saved lives that day, and or attempted to save lives that day. But it's not easy, but unfortunately it happened, and all we could do was make sure that our people that we had, our passengers, were safe, and that we protected them. The troops knew it was serious when I went and got my rifle, because I normally just had a pistol. Suddenly I turned up with a rifle and they're like, oh okay. She means it. Yeah, we're getting to that point, are we? Again. But again, because we had been attacked sort of pretty on and off throughout the 2 weeks. So it was another attack. Unfortunately, it was a very, very lethal one.
Who do you and your colleagues, your very young colleagues in some cases, who do you blame for all this?
I can't talk for my colleagues. Obviously, it's a personal thing. I don't think I blame anybody. I don't think there is anybody to blame. I think we left Afghanistan. That was a political decision. It's as simple as that. Politicians decided that they'd had enough. But I don't think that's not blame. That's just them making a political decision. Who do I blame for the terrorist attack in the Islamic State? It's as simple as that. They were the ones that decided to murder innocent civilians.
And who helps you and the people that you were with to put this afterwards into some kind of context and to get on with the rest of your lives? That's
a challenging one, isn't it? So. Again, our troops are really resilient, and they do have the support of each other, which has helped. Slightly different as the boss, because you step back from your troops. They don't need to see me having deeper meaningfuls. That's not how it works. So I've had help from a number of sources. So I have PTSD stone that comes up in the 3rd episode.
Yeah.
I also have a moral injury, which is essentially where you do things that go so against your moral code that it undermines who you are as a person, basically. So the Padre system, which are chaplains, multi-faith chaplains, are responsible for looking at that, and I've been supported through that and continue to be supported through that by the chaplaincy. The PTSD, the military are really used to. 20 years of war on terror has made them very good at dealing with it. And we have our own community mental health teams, and I'm still again receiving sort of treatment through the community mental health teams. My colleagues and my bosses have been absolutely fantastic at, and in fact, in the first instance, just telling me you're not okay and you need some help, but then supporting me through that. And then actually the RAF Benevolent Fund, which is a charity, has also provided some counselling for the moral injury as well. So it's not a one-person solution. There's lots and lots of different avenues, and I've been, to be honest, I've been really humbled by how many people have wanted to just put an arm around me and make sure I'm okay and support me through all this.
Well, I don't think anyone can watch these programmes or listen to you speak and not feel that way. And of course, as you say, it's not just you who features in the documentaries. There's nurses, doctors, paras, there's the Padre, who I was really struck by as well, as you mentioned. I mean, all of you, it actually humbles those of us who've never been in the forces and have never had to make these incredible decisions in a nanosecond. Do you take some comfort from knowing that most of us lack the courage, genuinely lack any of the courage that would be required to be in that situation that you were in? Does that help you at all?
I don't think people do, actually. I think you'd be amazed what you can do, and you have to. And every single day I was there, well, certainly after about day 2 or 3, it was like, I can't. I used to have a little walk for about 20 minutes up to the Joint Task Force headquarters at 6 o'clock each morning, 7 o'clock each morning for a briefing. And that was my, I can't do this time. And I'd just sort of walk up there on my own, didn't get a lift, always walked. And then again in the afternoon for another brief. And that was my sort of time to just go, all right, part that, you can do it, but just sort of suck it up. And there's an end date on it. And I think actually, you can do it. People just don't realise they can do it.
How much longer are you going to stay in the Air Force?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I can serve till I'm 55, but we'll see.
Diana, thank you very much.
Thanks.